So welcome everybody. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. And I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as a grantee, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now a full-time NIH grant mentor. And I have helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding over the years. So I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So just a reminder for those of you who are attending live, you are in listen-only mode. So we are here to answer your questions. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. And if you have information that you want to share, that is relevant to whatever we're discussing, because we can all share information about grantsmanship together. Feel free to put it in the chat box as well. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, because we do record these and upload them to our YouTube channel so that our members who are not available at this time can watch them. Just remember that things move quickly at NIH, and we're answering these questions to the best of our knowledge as of March 22nd, 2023. But if you're watching this at some point in the future, things change. Always check at NIH to make sure the information is still accurate. A couple of quick updates. If you are preparing for a cycle 2 submission, which would be a deadline in June or July, you probably want to be watching something like Master the R-Series preparation course. And some very exciting updates on our end. We have a lot going on behind the scenes at my company. So you probably saw our email that we are in the midst of a rebranding. So as of March 31st, we will be known as Bouvier Grant Group, which I think more precisely indicates the kind of work we do. I actually began the company back in 2007 as a medical writing company, and primarily as a policy writing company, because I was a policy writer at NIH, and I've evolved into exclusively NIH grant writing. So we felt that the new name of the company better reflected what we did. And the other thing is that we are launching a brand new learning management system, which we're really excited about. Some of you on the call served as beta testers, so we're really excited about that as well. For those who don't know, I am next Wednesday, which I think is the 29th. Yes, I will be giving a live stream boot camp to our members. So it is Master the R-Series, but I present it live and answer questions as we go along. So that will be, I'm actually putting the finishing touches on updating that course. I'll be recording it in the recording studio on Monday and Tuesday. So you'll see that in the learning management system probably sometime later in April after the Mass Medical Society accredits it for CME. And I'll be giving that updated version live on Wednesday, March 29th. So for those of you who would like to do a live stream boot camp next Wednesday, if you have not registered, there's a registration link on our homepage, or feel free to ask in the Q&A box for the registration link, and Jamie can dump it in there for people to register. It is included in membership, so everybody on this call gets it with no additional cost. So, and that will be, I believe it's at noon Eastern time, March 29th. And I think that's all of our updates. We have a lot going on in the company right now. So I am thrilled to have back on AGE my buddy, Dr. Becky Miro, who is going to be presenting today about the just-in-time request, which we tend to get a lot of questions about. So and I see people are putting questions in the Q&A box. Go right ahead and keep dumping your questions in there, because when Becky is done presenting on the just-in-time request in the award process, she and I will begin to answer questions. Becky, without further ado, why don't you give a quick introduction and then tell us about just-in-time requests from NIH.
Thanks, Meg. Hi, everyone. So a little bit about me. I have about 25 years of experience as a research administrator. I've worked mostly in higher ed and at one cancer center over the years. I became a certified research administrator in 2004, and I have a PhD in higher ed administration with a research methods concentration. So I'm going to present not too long on the just-in-time and the award process. I know applicants get really excited when they get a just-in-time email. They're like, oh, I'm going to be funded. And it's a good sign to get just-in-time requests, but it doesn't automatically mean that you will be awarded. So what is just-in-time and what isn't is? So just-in-time is an NIH request for information process that's usually part of the award process. It's not a notification of award, and it's not a guarantee that an award will be made. So one thing I learned recently actually is that the first just-in-time request is automatically generated by the NIH system for any application that receives a score of 30 or less. But that might actually be out of some institute and centers pay lines. So that's just the first example of how that first email should be taken with a grain of salt. The specific institute and center will then send a more detailed just-in-time request if they choose to move forward in that sense. So like I just mentioned, the first just-in-time is for all applications that receive a score of 30 or less. Other factors that can affect how an institute or center makes a funding decision is their own priorities, their portfolio balance, how much money they might have, how relevant the application is to their program. So just remember that there's a lot of things that play into this, and towards the end of the presentation, we'll get a little bit into what you can do to help your own cause, but still remembering that the institute or center still makes the decision. So what's commonly requested as part of just-in-time? So people may be aware of the other support for key personnel, which is not included at proposal time. And they'll ask for your IRB approval, or if you're doing research with animals, your IACUC approval, or other kind of compliance documents, like if you're doing embryonic stem cells and so forth. Now, I have seen them also make requests for revised budgets and justifications, not so much if you're doing a modular one, obviously, but if you have a detailed budget. And for example, I had an instance where an investigator actually, the budget was reduced considerably from what they had originally requested. So NIH wanted a new budget that reflected that reality and a justification to go along with it. And in this case, they also had the lead institution and a subcontract, and they requested updated indirect cost rate agreements from each institution as part of the just-in-time process.
So Becky, did you have we're not seeing any slides. Did you want to share a slide that
You're not seeing
information? No.
Uh-oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing. Hang on, I will start again. It must have gotten lost somewhere. My apologies.
Because I know you had a quote from that.
Yes, I was getting to that slide next. Okay, can you see that now?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me actually, since it's not long, I'll jump through it again. So quickly, what it is and what it isn't, we discussed that. Here are some of the things that can affect an institute and center's funding decision. I mentioned being out of their pay line, their priorities, the programmatic relevance, availability of funds. And this is where I was, where I mentioned the commonly requested documents are your other support for the key personnel and your compliance approvals. But, I've seen them request revised budgets and justifications and F&A agreements. And then this next slide is actually taken from an award that was received that I'm familiar with. And so they did the just in time. They released the award, but the award came with a multitude of restrictions, including that they wanted a timeline of this projected participant accrual. They wanted a timeline for the data analysis and manuscript preparation. So all of these then had to be provided later on before the award could be before they could begin recruitment and enrollment of participants. And in addition, there was another clause that restricted enrollment, of course, because this was a multi-site study and one of the sites had not completed their reliance agreement with the lead institution. So that severely delayed enrollment as well. They would not remove any of these conditions to that award until everything was met. So here, and Meg is going to probably be way helpful on this. So tips for getting your just in time and moving forward. Make sure you address any NIH inquiry promptly. And one of the other things I learned recently, I had sort of guessed at this in my years of dealing with it, but this one confirmed it, that NIH puts pressure on their grants people to process awards before September 30th at the end of the fiscal, which is the end of their fiscal year. So if you're, for whatever reason, going through just in time and you're getting close to end of August, beginning of September, really be sure to get all documents that they request as quickly as possible as you can to them.
Yeah. So I would say the summaries here are: a just-in-time request is necessary but not sufficient to funding. So if you don't get one, you're probably out of the running. If you do get one, you may be in the running, but it's not a guarantee of award. And the other key take-home message here is that you could be asked for anything as just-in-time request. You may be asked for things that you have already provided. You may be asked for them again, and you may receive more than one round of requests. And often there are contingencies on either the release of the money or the start of the project. So these things can be a pain in the butt, but you got to do them. And this whole thing, yeah, and Becky's showing that slide again. You know, and she had shared with me that the timeline, they had already given a timeline of projected participant accrual, randomization, et cetera. They asked for it again. So, you know, don't be surprised that they may throw anything at you. And the sooner you can get that stuff back, the better, particularly as you get toward the end of the FY year, because they may be, a given institute may be looking to use up excess funding at the end of the federal year. And in fact, sometimes I have applicants who, you know, they were reviewed in, I don't know, like January, and they're right around the funding line and they're not hearing. And then all of a sudden in late September, you're funded. And it's because they were around the funding line, and the institute waited until the end of the year to see if they had surplus funds to use up. And it's use it or lose it in the federal government. Like you gotta use up that federal year's money. So a lot of people, there's usually like a bolus of applications that were kind of just held in reserve that will get funded in late summer and September. So anyway, that's the just-in-time request. I get tons of questions about that, and I think Becky does too. There's a lot of confusion. People get a just-in-time request, and they're like clicking their heels together, like, "Woo, we're getting funded," and it's like, no, you're not yet. So you know, as Becky said, you get a score of 30 and it's automatically sent, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be funded. So. All right, so let's move on to our Q&A for the second half of this. It looks like lots of people have been putting questions in here. And I'll try to get to all of those before time is out. And Becky, feel free to jump in on any of these. The first one, what is considered a substantial preliminary data to be competitive for an R01, debating between R01s and smaller Rs? That's the $1 million question. So, yeah, usually it varies by field. So you definitely have to have multiple first or last author publications in the field in which you're proposing. You definitely have to have multiple publications with the team that you're proposing. This is for an R01. But how many publications? I would discuss that with mentors and with a program officer. It varies tremendously by field. So for example, I have clients who are biostatisticians who churn out 2-author papers, and there's a higher expectation of publication for them, in terms of number of publications. Whereas, for example, when I was a bench scientist, I was doing bench science wet lab work in animal models, and the larger the animal model, the more expensive it is. So those publications, you tend to have fewer of them, so the requirement for an R01, I mean, nothing's written in stone, but it's just, you're probably going to be expected to have fewer publications if you're in that particular situation. It also depends on the study section. Like, you may submit 1 year and then 4 years later submit to the same study section with a very similar set of circumstances, and one group of reviewers think it's adequate for an R01 and the other one doesn't. So, you got to give it your best guess in discussion with your program officer and your mentors in light of the kind of field that you're in, and then just give it a try, send it in and see what they say. The second part of that is, are R01s generally awarded to those safer proposals with minimal risk yet novel, especially versus an R21? I would even argue that R21s are pretty conservative. I know they're not supposed to be. NIH is often criticized for funding next to logical steps research. It is absolutely 100% true at the R01 level. It's also somewhat true at the R21 level. R21s are meant to be, if you're breaking new ground or you're taking your research in a new direction, there's usually some innovative aspect, some level of risk, but practically speaking, and I think Becky would probably agree with this, the R21s that get funded, they tend to be fairly conservative also. They tend to have less preliminary data than an R01, but you absolutely have to have preliminary data for an R21 to get funded, unless the FOA specifically states no preliminary data allowed. Would you agree with that, Becky, in your experience?
I do agree, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think if you're really doing something high risk, high reward, you got to go into one of those mechanisms out of the Common Fund. So you have like the DP2, the DP5, there are 4 of them depending on your career stage. The DP2 and DP5 are for the ESIs. And R21, if you have, less data, it's a little more of a new direction, or maybe the CATs if you're an ESI. But, really, even the R21s, they're going to expect some level of preliminary data, not the crushing amount that they expect on the R01. Anyway, yeah. So I would check with your program officer and your mentors to see where their best guess is about where the line is for you if you have enough preliminary data for an R01. Okay, next question. I have a project that has been submitted, resubmitted, and ended up not getting funded. I'm considering the option of submitting this project again as a new submission. One, going in as a new submission, how different does the proposal need to be? I mean, just move it forward. You probably have more preliminary data. It doesn't have to be dramatically different than the other one, because you've kind of run out your options on that first round of doing an A0 and an A1, and now you're sending it in as a new submission, not connected to anything else. So it doesn't have to be dramatically different, but I assume that since it wasn't funded the last time, you would still be reading the summary statements and strengthening the application and adding preliminary data you've gathered in the meantime. For a new submission, I plan to choose a study section different than the one that reviewed my project for my primary choice. That's fine. Is it also necessary to choose a different institute? No, it is not. You can keep so even on a resubmission, even on an A1, you don't necessarily have to go with the same IC and study section. I would argue that you should probably consider the same study section, but on the A0 as a third submission, you absolutely can go in with a different study section and the same institute. If prior submission was discussed but did not get a score good enough for funding, yep, you definitely can do that. You can go in as a third submission as an A0 with a different study section and the same institute. But again, I would encourage you to still make use of the summary statements you got in the A1, the second submission, to strengthen the application, because you may get some of the same critiques even at a new study section. And still talk to the program officer about it, whether it was discussed at the study section or not. I always suggest that people send the summary statements to the program officer and send them your draft introduction page so that they have a sense of how you're going. Oh, you're not going to write an introduction. Never mind. Talk to them about how you're going to address the concerns that were raised in the summary statements, and just make sure that they agree with you that you're doing enough to make it a stronger R01, even though it's going in as an A0. Okay, let's see. What are your thoughts on submitting an R01 grant for the third time? Should we give up at that point? No, and split the idea into smaller proposals, or try once more on the R01, I think you mean. Feedback was pretty bimodal over the two submissions. 3 reviewers gave high scores, 3 reviewers gave average to low scores. Okay, so right now, NIH has had different policies over the years. So way back in the Stone Ages, when I was first starting out, they allowed 3 submissions. Then they went to 2 strikes, you're out. And like at the end of the second try, you were out. That was it, no more. And there was a hue and cry about that. So now they still have the 2 strikes, you're out, but you can retool and submit it as an A0 and go in for a third time. And then you can submit an A1 on that, which would be your 4th submission, et cetera, et cetera. That has set up a situation. And I should say the reason that NIH did that was because they were trying to fund the best science in a shorter amount of time, because statistically CSR noticed that most applications had been funded on the 3rd submission way back when they allowed 3. So that's why NIH initially reduced it to 2 shots. Now it's kind of backfired, because now you can just keep submitting and submitting and submitting as an A0, A1, A0, A1, A0, A1. And in fact, some people do submit 5 and 6 times. And this, in my opinion, has backfired because it creates a situation where NIH grant writing really favors people who are incredibly tenacious. So I would say for this person who's asking this question about whether to submit a third time, you absolutely should submit a third time. So I don't know your particular set of circumstances, but it is not at all uncommon for me to see people get funded on a 3rd, 4th, 5th submission. Going in this strategy of A0, A1, A0, A1. And, part of it is that there's an element of this that is capricious now, because, and I'm sure I've talked about this in this format, because it kind of drives me crazy as somebody who's helping people write grant applications, but reviewers on standing study sections used to be invited to serve 3 times a year for 4 years, so 12 consecutive sessions. That was pretty onerous for people who were volunteering their time. So now they're invited to serve a minimum of 2 times a year over a maximum of 6 years, so 12 non-consecutive sessions. So every year they're allowed to sit one out. Not all of them do it, but many of them do. The problem with that, for those of you who are resubmitting, is that if you resubmit, you might get assigned a whole new crop of reviewers, even if you resubmit quickly to the same study section. And this can cause scores to bounce around. So you might have an A0 that scores 30th percentile, and then you diligently respond to everything in the summary statements, and your A1 is not discussed. And then you put in a third submission as an A0, and maybe that one is 45th percentile, and then you diligently respond to the reviews and you put it in as an A1, which is really your fourth submission, and that one is scored 23rd percentile, and it just bounces and bounces and bounces. It's really maddening. It is absolutely crazy making. So part of the reason why I am in favor of people doing these repeat submissions is that some of this is just hitting the right reviewers at the right time, at the right institute, with the right project. And, like, you have to just keep trying. Having said that, it takes 9 months to get an answer from anything at NIH. So I am in favor of breaking aims off and potentially sending them to private foundations, which you can do in parallel. So, or even to different agencies, federal agencies, if that's an option for you. There are many federal agencies that have a biomedical funding portfolio. So you may want to do that to hedge your bet, so that you're not just resubmitting the identical R01 or using up all your startup funds to push this thing forward, but you're actually making an effort to bring in some other funds to keep pushing the project forward and beefing up your preliminary data to put in a stronger application. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Particularly if you're ESI, keep putting it in as an R01 and don't break off pieces to go in as an R03 or an R21. Instead, break off pieces to go into private foundations to keep pushing it, the project further along. Okay, and we have another one here. How risky is it to have one exploratory aim without preliminary data? All other aims have strong preliminary data. This is for an R01. I've seen that go both ways. I've seen reviewers who really don't like exploratory aims and reviewers who aren't bothered by it in the least. And if you really, I know that we've talked, this issue of exploratory aims seems to come up many weeks here. So I know this is very much on people's minds because we're getting a lot of questions on them. The benefit, as you know, I've said before, the benefit of an exploratory aim is that if you're anticipating that reviewers are going to say, hey, how come you didn't look at this in an in vivo model? Or how come you didn't look at this in this other group of humans or whatever it is? If you're anticipating that criticism, but you, in the budget and time allowed on this application, you can't answer that question in a way that is statistically significant and publishable, the exploratory aim could be a nice middle ground, because you're letting reviewers know, hey, I know that this is important. I know you're going to come back at me with this criticism, but it's beyond the scope of the current application. I'm not going to have the time or the money to do this justice and do it in a statistically significant and publishable way. But I'm going to dip a toe in the water to let you know that I know it's important, and to inform the follow-up R01, to inform the design of the follow-up R01. It can work beautifully in that situation. But not all reviewers like an exploratory aim. Sometimes they get a little pissy about, like, well, why did you include this? If you can't finish the aim, why'd you include it at all? Just take it out, So part of this is, submitting to any given study section. It's a little bit like throwing pasta against the wall to see what sticks. Some of it is just put it out there to a given study section and see how they respond. You can make your best guess by talking to program officers and saying, how do you think this study section is going to respond to this exploratory aim? Or ask your mentors or colleagues who might have submitted recently to that study section, or who might have served on that study section at one time, who might have some sense of like the flavor of that study section. But in the end, you're really not going to know until you just throw the pasta on the wall and see how they react to it. I wish there were an easier answer, because it's 9 months to get an answer on these applications, but But anyway, I think if all your other aims have strong preliminary data and you have an exploratory aim and it doesn't have any data and you're ready to submit and you really don't want to wait 3 more months to get a little bit of preliminary data on that exploratory aim, then put it in and see what they say. You're always weighing it, do I wait 3 months to get a little preliminary data and risk, I don't know, being scooped, or, I think it's ready now or whatever. Versus, I'll put it in now and then I won't have it answered for 9 months. And then they may come back saying that they want a little data. And it really depends on how anxious you are to put it in, how worried you are about being, having somebody else put in a similar application, your own personal circumstances, how much pressure you're under to submit an R01. And again, this sort of strategy can be discussed with a program officer and with mentors. So I wish I could give you a hard and fast rule, but like much of NIH grantsmanship, there are no hard and fast rules. I'm sorry. So anyway, we are out of time. So I just want to remind people again that I am giving a live stream boot camp, Master the R series, next Wednesday, March 29th, beginning at noon Eastern time. It'll go about 4.5 hours with breaks. And lots of people answer questions. We have a nice, robust sign up right now. I think we're up to maybe 80-ish people right now. It's across member organizations. And it's very beneficial to hear other people's questions. So for those who are newbies, it can be a really good thing. And the registration link is in the chat box and it's on our homepage, and it costs nothing for members. So everybody on this call can attend for no extra charge. So anyway, I want to thank Becky for talking to us about just-in-time requests and clearing that up. And we will be seeing Becky again in April 19th, where she's going to give us an update on the new DMS policy. I keep wanting to say DSM, but I think it's DMS this time. And comparing that to resource sharing plans and new templates that NIH has put out and all of that good stuff. So we're looking forward to having you back, Becky.
Thanks for having me on today, and I'm looking forward to that one.
All right, guys, good luck with your grant writing, and hopefully I'll see a bunch of you next Wednesday. And if not, I'll see you in 2 weeks at AG. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.